So let's say you have a terrain you already like. Let's start working with that and making some changes to it. One of the first things you're going to want to check out is the scale of our landscape. So by default, this little landscape tool comes in at 2 by 2 meters, which this is a cube that is about 1.7 meters tall. That's roughly the average height of an American man. So a little under 6 feet. And that cube is about 6 feet tall, and that is the terrain. So it's way, way too small. So you usually end up scaling it up by quite a large factor. Here's that terrain, same one, scaled up 200%. And there is that same cube. I colored it magenta so it would poke out a little bit better. And that feels like a much better scale. Remember, Blender's units, what it calls as units here, are all in meters. And that's really important because most engines that you're going to be working or exporting something like this to, be it for film compositing or game work, is also going to be in meters. So really important to understand what units you're in, because when you start assembling everything in your scene, you want everything to fit the scale of the scene. And so building a little cube like this is a really good idea. So let's take my scene that I was working with already here, and I'll do just that. I'm going to click off, Shift A, I'll create a cube, and under N, I'm going to go to my item here, and I'm going to change dimensions. I can actually edit the dimensions in here. So I could say I want it 1 meter by 1 meter, and then Z, I want it 1.7 meters. And then to make this little scalar work well for me, I'm going to tab into it. I'm going to have everything selected. So A, if it's an already selected, and then hit G and Z. And I just want to drag it up so that it's right on here. I'm doing this because now the pivot of that object is down there, meaning if I scale things or I place stuff, it's happening from there. So now that I've done that, I can take this landscape, both the plane and the water, and I'm going to hit S200, something like that. I could even go higher depending on if I wanted. So I could change this to S300 pretty safely. Now keep in mind, as you get further away, your thing will disappear. This is called clipping, and it's based on how far the camera is able to see. So it's got a clip direction where it can't see any further away. So like, it shouldn't be an issue for us because we'll kind of be generally in this area, but I'm just saying, warning you, if you get really far away and you go, hey, where'd my thing go? That's where. So now I can take this cube and generally move it around, and I want to get the sense of, does this cube feel like he would be comfortable kind of crawling up on here? And that looks pretty good. Now, one more thing, let's say this is my game character, and I can always zoom into this by hitting the period key on my numpad or going up to view, and it's called this frame selected, so it will frame up that object. I can still see the square of my plane here, so it's way too small. So usually I just scale it way the heck up, but you see as I scale it, it's scaling it relative to the position it's in. So tab, and then I'm gonna scale it from here. And we just take it out, and then now if we're at this point here, and I do the same thing, click this guy and frame it up. If I sort of look around the horizon, I can't tell that it's a cube anymore. But it's still a nice big plane, I just can't tell. So that's gonna work great for us. So now that our scale's worked out, we want to add some color or some shading to it. It's pretty boring as a flat color like this. So what I can do is, instead of painting it by hand or choosing verts like I did before, like where we chose faces and actually assigned those to shade it somewhere, we can make use of some pretty cool little nodes using the shading editor, and I'll show you exactly how that works. So I'm going to take this object here, just this one, I don't want the plane, and let's rename these. I'm going to name this Ocean, so I know that's here, and landscape is probably a good name for this. So with landscape selected, I'm going to go to shading, and I'm now looking at this object in my shading tab. So what I know is, like that whole erosion thing, I know I should have grass at a certain level, and I should have just ground at a certain level, and I should have like beach at a certain level, and I should have under the water at a certain level. So because I know everything's just purely up and down like this, I can make all of my colors in a single gradient. So with this selected, I'm going to click new, and this will be, it's called material 1, but I'm going to do this land matte because it's my shader for my material. And we know we can come in and put a base color or even put a texture in here, but I'm going to do something a little bit more advanced. So Shift A, and we have all these different nodes that we can grab here, and I have a couple that I want. Under texture, I'm going to want the gradient texture node. Under the input node, I'm going to want my texture coordinates node. Under this one as well, I believe I don't need any of these. If you ever can't remember where something is too, go into search. I want a mapping node. And the last one I want is Shift A under search. I want a color ramp node, which is their term for a gradient. Make sure my little screen keys is on here. It turns off every time I go to a new thing, so there it is. Don't exactly need this little navigator, but so what I need to do is set up a little network. What I want is to take this data and information and plug it straight into this color. The problem I'm going to have is it doesn't actually, I can change it here, but I'm not getting this level of it going up and down because I can't control the direction of it. What I need to do is take the texture coordinates, and we want to take generated and plug it into vector. Anytime you see purple, it means that there's 3 pieces of information coming off and going onto this. By the way, like this whole editor, the node editor for shading is so cool. There's so much stuff you can do with it. I'll probably show you more in the semester, but I thought this was a nice introduction to it. The mapping thing basically does that UV mapping you did in week 1, where you assigned where things were on that texture, and it does it for you automatically. However, we can control everything from there. So we want to take the vector from there, which is sort of like our UV direction, and plug into that. And now the last thing we want to do is take the FAC, not the color, because this is a black and white channel that's just like our UV information, and plug it into the FAC right here. So what this is going to do, is you can see, is we've got now a ramp that colors across everything, but it's running like left to right. We want it to run up and down. So if I go into rotation and I rotate my mapping here, well, now I got this. So now I'm really cooking because I can start changing these colors. So let's start by saying, okay, I'm going to want like, what is at the top, what's at the bottom, what's in the middle. Let's make a couple extra little nodes in this color ramp. So I can add a new channel. And maybe in the middle here, I say the top of this is going to be like a snowy peak. And then under it, some rock. And then right about here, I want some grass. So let's just pick a color. You don't want to go too saturated. That's a pretty common mistake. Remember, this is the background, so it should be pretty subtle. And then wherever I slide this, you can see is where one thing starts and the other one kind of begins. So how high up should the grass on these hills be? If this is mountains, maybe the top doesn't have a lot of grass and stuff like that on it. And I can always click in and change the color of any of these channels. I'm going to add, maybe take this one right here, and I want to add another channel in. So this might be where my beach starts. So let's get a nice beachy kind of tan color. Again, lower the saturation, maybe something like that. And I want both of these to be the same grass color because it'll control my top and bottom range. So if I click this grass, I can, or whichever one I like better, I can click this grass and hit the eyedropper and just eyedrop itself. And so we see however close they are together is how strong that range is. And then I can even say, well, hey, let's do, you know, the sand is wet near the edge of the beach or something like that. Desaturate that so it goes a little darker in color and tone. And then wherever I place that is where that gets set. So now I have the colors for everything, but it's all being made for me like automatically. And I can come back in here and change these anytime I want by coming back to the shading tab and playing with those. So yeah, it's really convenient. So this is, I wanted to reference you. So if you want to go back into this video and just look at this from the slides, this is in the slides. It shows you exactly where everything connects into everything else. Thought you might find that useful. Then we have to think about like, where do we put plants and things like that? So to just give you in a nutshell, the brief idea of plant stratification, the best chart I could find for this was in German, but I'll walk you through it. We have the tree layer, which consists of the canopy. That's the highest trees up. And then the understory, this is trees just below the canopy. So these might be growing up. So this is like, especially if you see in a rainforest, you have this really dense packing of trees on the top, and then there's not a lot of leaves underneath because the leaves are there to catch sunlight. Then after that, we kind of go down to about this level, and this is our shrub level. So young trees are here, bushes are here. This is anywhere between 1.5 to 5 meters. So it's not quite as tall as this top layer. There's usually a pretty strong like area in between the two. Then we have down to here, like this lower level, kind of along here is where like tall grasses and things are. It's called the herb layer, or herb layer, depending on how you pronounce that. This is where you're going to find flowers and bushes and shrubs and seedlings and trees that are just growing up. Then below that, you get what's called the forest floor. This usually consists of things like moss or lichen. It's usually no more than 15 centimeters or so high. It's got dead plant materials, like could be, animal bones, things like that. This is also where your like funguses, your mushroom, any bacteria are. And right under that is like our root layer. So this is like roots and bulbs and things like that that are just starting to poke out of the top of the surface. And so thinking about like the layers of everything is going to help us put this together. So maybe you have an idea, you made some plants, you have this terrain, how do we put it all together? If you're following along this demo, I do recommend building out the land in your scene that you already have your plants and stuff like that in, so that we can just assemble it all together. But I'm just showing you how it's done. What we can use is something called a particle system. Now a particle system just basically lets us say this is our emitter, and it creates lots of stuff around it. There's basically two kinds of particle systems in Blender. One is the emitter system. This is used for things like fire, smoke, things like that. Basically what it does is it shoots out lots of little particles. Maybe it affects by gravity, maybe they move by wind, and this is how they create like maybe what you would think of as like visual or special effects kind of things. The other kind is hair, and this is used most obviously for hair, but it's also used for distributing things like grass, and it can be used for scattering objects around a scene or on an object, because unlike this particle system, which is all about physics collision and where they're going, this system is all about how do they distribute from the surface, and we can use this hair system to basically get Blender to place all these trees for us so we don't have to do it by hand. So let's take a look at that really quick. To do this, of course, I don't have any trees or anything like that right now. So what I'm going to do is take my ocean and my landscape. I can just control click them in there. Screen keys back on. And then I can hit M to add them to a collection. And I'm going to call this landscape. That's my landscape collection. Now it's all in here and I can easily hide it and get it out of the way. I made some other trees before. Let me make a nice coniferous tree. And what better way to start with a coniferous tree than with a cone? So let's move that up. And I'm not really too worried about the sides and everything on it because of course I'm going to be using like a pretty heavy decimate modifier on it. So let's scale it up in the y-axis. Let's hit 3 and let's do an inset on here. Give me my trunk. Put it down to about the ground, something like that. And then I can't use my control R because these are all triangles. It all comes to a point here, but I can fix that really quick by going to the side. Make sure I'm in edit mode. I hit K and then I hit C, which is going to be one straight line, and Z, which is going to draw through the whole thing. And I'm going to cut maybe right about there. So now if I do control R, I can make these into cuts as well. So let's take this and I can alt click and then hold shift and alt click, shift and alt click to get these lines. I'm gonna hit, well actually this is how I'll do it. I'm just gonna go do another edge and I'm gonna run it this way. And then I'm just gonna, ooh, I still have proportional edit on, turn that off. And I'll just scale this out. So same kind of deal. Take this, S, just scale it out. Take this line, maybe I'll go up to here with this one, and then S to scale it out. Missed something there. Let's see if you could figure out where I went wrong. So when I made these edges, ooh, so I have extra verts in here. Not exactly sure how, but let's go ahead and dissolve those verts. That's why I was creating that exact problem. Now these should be good all the way through. So I'm taking this, scaling it out, taking this, scaling it out, taking this, bringing it out, and this one I gotta do from the bottom. That's okay, just 2. You know, feel free to shape this generally however you want. That's kind of what's fun about this stuff. Like, I can kind of just play with the settings a little bit, but I'm gonna take this whole thing now. I can add I like to modify or change its overall shape with stuff. So I could go to add modifier, and I'm gonna do one of those displace modifiers, and let's create a new texture. I'm gonna name this tree displace, and I'm just gonna do a simple, something like a clouds is usually pretty good, simple. Like, we can see how much it's pushing the shapes around. I do have one problem with this though, is it's pushing this all around, but it's like pushing the trunk of my tree a lot too. So I want to show you something else right in here that I was going to use later. We can use something called vert groups to control where something happens on almost all of these modifiers. All we have to do is just select some verts and say this is all part of a vert group. I'll show you where that is. So on this object, if I'm in edit mode, I'm going to hit Alt-Z, or I can hit X-ray up here. I'm going to hit 1, and I'm just going to drag across all of this here. And this looks like I got another rogue vert in here. So just is all that. But I want to get all of these, and I don't want the trunk stuff at all. So I'm going to control. So I want all of these to be edited, and I don't want this trunk to be edited by that at all. So I can take all these now, and I can come into this little object data, and now I have vertex groups, and I can add one. I'm going to name this just tree branches, so I know what it is. And then I have to assign everything that's here. If I don't assign it, doesn't do anything. Default weight is 1. That's great. So see, now we have this whole crazy thing going on. Instead, if I go to vertex group tree branches, they'll keep this nice and clean, and it gives me all the messiness that I want here. Perfect. So I can take that little trick I did before, where I go and I do a little empty axes, and I set its space to object, and I set it to here, because that means if I move this guy around, it creates little variations for me. And then I can go add modifier, and we can do our decimate. And just play around with it till I get some other stuff. So now I got this, I can duplicate it and duplicate it, because I want, you know, more than one tree, and you'll see why in a second. So, ooh, another thing. I want its pivot is up here in the center, and I want its pivot to be down at the base, because this object is going to get generated, and wherever its pivot is, it thinks this is where I'm going to intersect. So if I made the tree like this, it would be halfway through the ground. To fix that, I can just, you know, hit A like so, and let's take a look at it from this view. And I'm just going to move it up till about here, and then I can move it back down onto the ground. And I'll delete these and just take this and duplicate it over a couple times, like so. Okay, great. So this is a pretty good start for my little tree. And then I could take these obviously and, you know, make some changes or edits to them to get some like variations of different types of trees. So I got cone 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to take all these together, and you know, let's take all these right here, and I'm going to hit M, new collection, and I'm going to call this trees. Okay. So I can hide that. I don't need that anymore, and I can hide my collection and turn back on my landscape. So now I'm ready to start putting these trees on here. So let's take our whole landscape, and in here I want to turn off decimate for now, because I want to have all the geometry that's here. It's really important that I have it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my particle properties, and I'm going to add a new particle system. And I'm going to call this pine trees. Again, whatever you name any of these things is just to help you out, because maybe I'll be using this system to make pine trees and plants and rocks, and I distribute all sorts of stuff this way. So what I can do now is take this pine tree, and I'm going to set it to hair. And now we can see all the little hairs that are sticking up on this surface. And right now it's just rendering as single little lines. I'm going to turn on advanced because this gives me a lot more options. And under render, right now it's saying render as path. I have a lot of options, but one thing I can do is render as an object. So now that I have it rendered as an object, I can choose an object and I can choose cone 1. So it's in there, but a couple things. It's laying pretty flat on the surface and they're really, really tiny. That's okay, because what I'll do is I want to turn on rotation. I want to get the object rotation here. And under rotation, I have like its direction, and I'm going to set this to like a global Y. Okay, so they're all facing upright. Now what I can do is change my hair length. And by scrolling up my hair length and then setting up my scale between those two, I got a lot of pine trees. And I can really make some edits to these. So in rotation, I have a randomized rotate. So I can change a little bit, so make them a little wavier. Under my object scale, I can change scale randomness. So some of these are going to be bigger and some of these are going to be taller, kind of at random, which is pretty nice. They scale them down, but you notice the problem I have is I have a lot of underwater trees. So a lot of spaces I don't want my trees at all. So in order to fix that, I can come down here and you can see that there's a vertex group setting here for density. So let's go ahead and hit tab. And what I want to choose is where do I want trees? A couple ways I could do this. I could come in and, like we did before where we selected areas, I could draw out or paint out these and then use a vertex group. But, I have a faster way to get started. So I'm going to pop into this view and I know the trees should generally be up and not under the water. So I'm just going to drag over not all of this here, make one big line. And this kind of like gives me areas that the trees will or won't be. And I can always come back in and lower that a little bit if I want. And now I've got, these are areas that trees will appear. But, oh, that's one of the reasons why. I want to be in X-ray mode so I can get the ones in the back too. Let's drag across again. Now we got it. Okay, perfect. Because now I'm able to get lots more of these trees. So in vertex group, let's add a group. I'm going to call this tree dist for tree distribution and assign all these verts to it. Now when I come into my little tree thing in my particle system, I can come down to density and set tree distribution. I can invert this too if I wanted to only put it in the water, but now look at all that. I got all these trees. Some of them are not in places we should probably have trees. We can always go in and remove those verts. Another thing we can do is we're in object mode right now. If we go to particle edit, it's actually going to give us this little particle edit mode. These are used for like grooming hair, but we can come down to cut here. We can start cutting the trees on like this heavy side of the mountain so that when I come back into object mode, it doesn't have trees on that severe slope. Now I made 3 different kinds of trees, but we only have one tree. Well, let's go back to our settings under emission, and I'm going to just delete this edit really quick because I'm not able to make those changes while I'm in edit. But one of the things I want to show you can do is under render again. Instead of render as object, we can render as an entire collection. And now we can choose that trees collection, and it's going to choose all those different types of trees for me. And so just, we can play with the seeds to get the number of trees and to make them sparser or more populous. We can change, like we said before, the length to change it, the scale to change it. We have a lot of flexibility here. And anytime if I want to say, now I want to start distributing something else on this island or something else in here, I can always add another particle system and give it a whole other set of rules. So I can have one here for just my bushes or my grass or anything else. And I can keep adding and adding and adding more stuff. I, of course, can place these things by hand, but especially for things like plants and trees, when you understand the rules behind them, we can just place them by hand and it's a lot quicker. So that's the last of what I want to show you today. Next time, I'm going to be diving deeper into modeling out cool features or interesting landscape things that we want to draw our viewers' attention to.